Hi there, and welcome to Ian's Engage channel. I'm Ian. In my previous Tricky Bit progress report, I ended up with only 2 jobs left to complete before the second section of the Tricky Bit would be installed in the train room. But here's a question for you. Did anyone spot the deliberate mistake I made in that video? Anyone? No? Well, I completely forgot to drill holes for the point frog wires in the train room. So I'd better add that task to my list. Also, the original 2 tasks are a bit vague. I'll leave them that way though, but we'll be tackling them in several steps as the video progresses. Right, so hopefully, with fingers crossed and a bit of good luck, I could have trains running across the second section of the Tricky Bit by the end of this video. So let's get on with it and see what happens. Better late than never, I finally realised my mistake and got around to drilling holes for the point frog wires in the train room. I employed my usual method of using a section as a template so I could use a cocktail stick to mark the location of the hole. I then removed the section, leaving the cocktail stick behind. I then placed my drill guide over the cocktail stick using the 6mm hole before removing the cocktail stick. I could then use my drill to create the hole. Once I was happy with both holes, I cleaned up the mess I'd made below the baseboard. I then used a straw to make sure that I drilled a hole all the way through the plywood base. Next, I cut some more straws to length and placed them into the dropper wire holes. The straws were a tight fit, so it didn't require gluing. The straws gave the holes a nice smooth side and would prevent the wires from snagging on either the foam or the plywood as they dropped below the baseboard. Once I had all of the required holes drilled into the baseboard, I took the section to the workbench and glued down the points. I was using Copydex for this, as it provided a strong but flexible bond between the Cork roadbed and the plastic sleepers. It also seemed to dry a lot more quickly than PVA, although I still recommend waiting at least 24 hours before trying to work with the glued down track. While the glue dried, I kept the points in place using staples, and also applied weight in the form of some engineering blocks. Next, I ignored my own advice of waiting for 24 hours for the glue to dry and started working on the point rodding after only a couple of hours. The point rodding needed to be installed next, as it would run underneath some of the adjacent track pieces. So before I could install any more track, I decided to install the point rodding for both of the points and connected them to their associated servo motors. I then used my servo tester to ensure that the points could be switched using the servo motors. Once that was done, I could begin to lay the remaining track. The next step was to lay the remaining track for the section. I did this quickly using a few staples to keep the track loosely in place. At this point, I wasn't too concerned about accuracy, as before the track was glued down, I wanted to check for electrical connectivity. I'd already checked the connections between the dropper wires and the track, but now it was time to check for connectivity between the track pieces. To do this, I connected a 9V battery to each pair of dropper wires in turn, and used my GaugeMaster track tester at various positions on the track to ensure that there was an electrical connection. I used electrical tape to mark the droppers that I'd already tested, so I wouldn't test them twice. There was a problem that had me perplexed for a while, where the track tester wouldn't light up. I was then surprised that the crocodile clips I was using to connect the dropper wires had got incredibly hot.
Oh, that's hot.
This smacked of a short circuit being created somewhere. I suddenly realised that I'd caused the short circuit myself by wrapping the electrical tape around the bare ends of the dropper wires. So after this revelation, I cut the bare ends off before wrapping them up. This solved the problem. Once I was happy that everything was connected, it was time to glue down the track. Gluing down the track was next on the agenda. To do this, I removed the staples from each piece of track and lifted the track away so I could apply the glue beneath it. I then positioned the track much more accurately, using my homemade track setter type templates where appropriate, and then secured it using staples. I needed to replace the rail joiners on a couple of pieces of track, as upon close inspection, the existing ones were a bit mangled. Unfortunately, while I was performing this task, my camera battery died and I didn't notice, so I didn't capture the whole process. As you can see from this footage though, I finished the task off by using engineering blocks again to weigh everything down until the glue dried. And this time I did follow my advice and left everything to dry for 24 hours. The next step was to install the section in the train room, which meant it was time to break out the baked bean tins again. I used the tins to elevate the section, which made it easier to drop the dropper wires through their associated holes. I also used my homemade Greyboard cable collars around the servo wiring to prevent it from dropping through the larger holes I drilled into the baseboard. I then removed the top tier of tins and continued to feed the wires through their holes. Once the bottom two tins had been removed, I further manipulated the wires and then gently pulled on them from below the baseboard until the section eventually dropped into place. This meant that the section was ready for power. Next, it was time to go to my least favourite place in the world, below the baseboard, in order to wire the section into the DCC bus. I still hadn't rationalised my DCC bus system, so the wiring would only be temporary. I used a combination of connectors to attach the dropper wires to the bus, but left the servo wiring and frog wiring for another day. The second section of the tricky bit was now in place and had power. Now that I had two sections of the tricky bit in place, it was far too tempting to leave them isolated. Therefore, I broke out the Xuron track cutters and cut a few pieces of flexible tractor size. These were then fitted between the two tricky bit sections and secured with staples. It was now time for the exciting part, a running session across two sections of the tricky bit. Before I began, I gave the track a thorough clean, as it had been sitting unused for about 3 months. As always, the honour of a first run was given to Templecoombe, my trusty Dapple Class 33. I was very excited as I applied power to the loco and watched as it trundled across the actual tricky bit of track work at the rear of the layout for the first time. Okay, so this has been an exciting episode, for me at least. As you can see, there are now two sections of the tricky bit installed in the train room, and they've been temporarily connected together. But what's left to do? Firstly, the section between the points needs to be properly fixed down, and dropper wires need to be attached. The end section then needs to be constructed that brings the tracks back through the scenic Greyboard towards the front of the layout. Once this is done, I'll then consider track laying for the tricky bit to be complete. However, there are quite a few other things that need to be done before I can claim that the whole of the tricky bit is complete. The servo motors still need to be connected up to their servo controller modules, and will also need calibrating. I also need to connect the auto frogs to the points. Oh, and let's not forget the block detection sensors. They will eventually require installing, although before I can do that, I'll need to purchase some. I'm holding off on these tasks though, until I've rationalised the DCC bus, and have added a second 5V power bus to power the servo motors and other accessories. Let me know if you can think of anything else, and I'll add it to one of my many lists of things to do. Alternatively, if you've got any hints, tips, tools or techniques to pass on to a fellow N-Gage modeller, or if you simply want to say hello, then please do so in the comment section. Anything and everything you've got to say will be greatly appreciated. That just leaves me to say Merry Christmas to everybody, and thanks ever so much for watching. Hopefully I'll have another update on my progress soon. Bye.